Long, long ago, in the realm of ancient Italy, a great strapping hero strode upon the earth. His name was Hercules, a mighty warrior favoured by the gods. One day, after crushing grapes in his rock-hard biceps and shaving his chiseled jawline, Hercules embarked for his legendary quest for the Golden Fleece. His path led him eventually to a region near the powerful Po River. In this land, a proud and formidable king named Eurytus ruled with an iron fist. His beautiful daughter, Calliope, possessed a grace and radiance that could rival the sun. When Hercules laid his eyes upon her, his heart was captivated and he yearned to make her his bride. Yet King Eurytus, blinded by his own ambition, refused the hero's request. He scorned Hercules and cast him away, denying him the hand of his beloved daughter. This act of defiance set in motion a clash of titanic proportions. Determined to prove his worthiness, Hercules faced King Eurytus in a series of grueling challenges. With each feat, the hero showcased his immense strength, remember the grape-crushing biceps, and indomitable spirit. But it was a test of unparalleled magnitude that would forever mark the destiny of Brescia. Hercules set his sights on the Mela River, a waterway that flowed through the land. Its currents were wild and untamed, often causing havoc and destruction. Undeterred, the hero summoned his God-given might and diverted the course of the river. With Herculean force, Hercules carved a new path for the Mela River, leading it through a marshy and forsaken terrain. The once desolate and waterlogged land now bloomed with life and fertility. It was a transformation of remarkable proportions. King Eurytus witnessed this incredible feat, finally understood the true strength and valor of Hercules, and he saw the hero's unwavering determination and boundless love for Calliope. Overwhelmed by the hero's prowess and the sincerity of his heart, the king relented. Being able to challenge the course of a river and chiseled features were obviously great husband material, it seems. But moving on. In a great celebration of their union, Hercules laid the foundations of a magnificent city. He named it Brixia, the Latin form for Brescia. It was a testament to his strength and the indelible mark he left upon the land. The city grew and flourished, becoming a beacon of culture, art, and prosperity. And this is the legend of how the city of Brescia was founded. The mighty Maggini. In this episode, we will be looking at the oh-so-influential Gio Paolo Maggini. If you haven't already listened to the first episodes on Brescian makers, stop and do that now, because to truly understand this maker, you'll need to know where he and his city came from. Episodes 1, 2, and 3 are about his master, Gasparo da Salo, and the Brescian school. In the previous episodes of the Violin Chronicles, I have been looking at the Amati family, but it would be greatly remiss of me to bypass this Brescian maker, living and working at the same time as the Amati brothers and Niccolo Amati, a mere 60 kilometers away. Now remember, the city of Cremona was still under Spanish rule, and Brescia was part of the Venetian state, which made them quite different, and this is also seen in the production of their instruments, as we will soon see. So I'm taking a break from Cremona just now to travel up the highway to the land of guns and violins. Hello and welcome to the Violin Chronicles, a podcast in which I, Linda Lespe, will attempt to bring to life the story surrounding famous, infamous, or just not very well known, but interesting violin makers of history. I'm a violin maker and restorer. I graduated from the French Violin Making School some years ago now, and I currently live and work in Sydney with my husband Antoine, who is also a violin maker and graduate of the French school. l'École Nationale de Lutherie in Mirecourt. As well as being a luthier, I've always been intrigued with the history of instruments I work with, and in particular, the lives of those who made them. So often when we look back at history, I know that I have a tendency to look at just one aspect, but here my aim is to join up the puzzle pieces and have a look at an altogether fascinating picture. So join me as I wade through tales not only of fame, famine and war, but also of love, artistic genius, revolutionary craftsmanship, determination, cunning and bravery that all have their part to play in the history of the violin. In the small village of Botticino, situated in the hills an hour from Brescia, lived the Maggini family. Giovan and Giulia lived with Giovan's father, Bartolomeo Maggini, and their two small children. Giovan, somewhat like the Amatis, had taken his time in marrying and was in his 40s when he eventually did find a wife and started a family of his own. As time passed, so did his elderly father, and it was all too evident that there was no future for their family in this small rural village. His children were getting older, and there were more possibilities and prospects for employment in Brescia. When Giovan was 57, his wife, Giulia, had just given birth to another child whom they named Gio Paolo, the star of our story. He was born in the autumn of 1580. Giovan's eldest son was eager to work as a shoemaker, and so the family moved to the large city of Brescia to start a new life. Over the years, the Maggini family settled into life in the vibrant city of Brescia. The youngest son, Gio Paolo, does not seem to have had an extensive education like his Cremonese counterparts, and when Gio Paolo was still very young, his father passed away. When they had arrived in Brescia, Giovan, his father, had set out to make a shoemaking business and failed, and then went on to promptly die. Perhaps his death was not a surprise, but to make ends meet after his death, Maggini's mother sold land to keep them afloat, and it is around this time in 1595 that the young Maggini becomes an apprentice of the well-known instrument maker Gasparo da Salo. It would have been a big change for Gio Paolo to begin with, but his apprenticeship in the well-established workshop was a success. Despite his lack of education, he may have also been a musician or singer, as many of the early luthiers were both. Life was looking good for Gio Paolo Maggini. He had a close relationship with his boss, Gasparo da Salo. He trusted him in the signing of legal documents. His life revolved around the musical district of Brescia and his friends and acquaintances, including musicians, well-known instrument makers, and other assistants who worked for da Salo. In 1602, he became friends with Paolo Vierici, who had returned from exile. Paolo's father was a close friend of Gasparo da Salo, whom we spoke about in the da Salo episodes. Still very young, in his early 20s, Gio Paolo, after 8 years of working with Gasparo da Salo, was ready to head out on his own. He appears to still have had amicable dealings with Gasparo Bertolotti and his family, even though he did leave and set up a new workshop with La Franchini, Gasparo's other assistant, who came along with him. In 1606, when Maggini was 26 years old, he bought a workshop and house near Gasparo's. He paid slightly higher than its real value, and the noble Ludovico Seria feared for its payment. But Maggini is able to pay with his mother's credit for her lands in Botticino, thanks to the good old bank of mum and dad. This new workshop is very visible in front of the Piazza Vecchio del Podesta, near Gasparo's and Antegiani's, he's the organ builder, their workshops, and it was in the prime instrument maker's quarters. In 1615, he is in his mid-30s with a well-established workshop that has been running for 9 years. Gio Paolo married the young Anna Foresti, a furrier's daughter, in January of 1615. She most probably knew da Salo's younger sister, Ludovica, who was also married to a furrier in Brescia. They undoubtedly lived in the artisanal district of the city, and Maggini was 34 and Anna 19 years old when they were married. The couple lived in the house in Contrada del Palazzo Vecchio del Podesta, opposite the old palace, and 8 days after the wedding, Maggini's wife signed in the kitchen a receipt for her dowry given by her father. The witnesses included a carpenter and a bootmaker and her husband's assistant, Jacob della Franchini, maestro di violini, living in the house with them. We can see that when he married, Maggini was in a comfortable position with a house, a workshop, a maid, and an assistant running a thriving business. He had a good trade stock and paid his employees well. Here I'm speaking to Christopher Moore, Principal Viola of the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra, who plays on a lovely Gio Paolo Maggini.
Mm-hmm. My name's Christopher Moore. I'm a viola operator. I am currently the Principal Viola of the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra. And before that, I was the Principal Viola of the Australian Chamber Orchestra for 10 years.
Right. Yeah. And owner of a puppy that we can hear
sometimes.
Yes.
Sorry, that was actually my child. Both one of them has a pupil-free day and the other is just not going to school. So
yeah. The teachers I know, they're like, why don't we have a teacher-free day?
Well, yeah. They seem to have a lot down in Victoria. Anyway.
So you're Principal Viola, and what viola do you play, Christopher?
I'm very lucky to be the, what would you call it? I'm not the owner. I play a wonderful Giovanni Paolo Maggini Viola from around 1610. Custodian, there we go. It was made about around 1610. Of course, I was listening to some of your podcast earlier, and as we know, some of these Brescian makers didn't really date their instruments until later on. So
yeah, it's tricky.
Yeah, so they just have to go on the dendrochronology.
Yep. Dendrochronology.
Yeah.
Yep. The dating of tree rings.
Mm-hmm.
And what's your dendrochronology?
I've got it here actually. So the report said that the youngest tree ring on the front is dated around 1591. So that puts the making of the instrument sort of 10, 20 years after that.
Yeah. Yeah. Because it's kind of complicated to understand, but the youngest tree ring would be on the outside of the tree.
Mm.
And then it's not necessarily the one on the most outside, depending on what piece of wood they used.
Yes.
So it's a guide, but you know it can't be
earlier than that, or
yeah. So yeah. And how long have you been playing this viola?
When did we get it? It was like 2014, I think, when I was. Well, that was when it was procured, but I was sort of searching for a viola in the Australian Chamber Orchestra for me to play around 2012, 2013. And we're comparing it to my wonderful instrument. It's a Arthur E. Smith from 1937.
Great Australian maker.
And we're comparing all these wonderful instruments to the Smith, and nothing really stacked up until we found this Maggini, which had that sort of similar fruity viola tone. That to compete with the Smith. So then we'd actually sort of given up the search, and this one sort of fell in our lap, the Maggini, and we just tried it, and we all fell in love with it. And so the anonymous benefactor, who may or may not be the enigmatic alter ego of Batman, we just don't know.
Oh yeah, I do think of Batman. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, so he or she has purchased this viola for the ACO ostensibly, but anyway, then I left the ACO, and viola stayed there for a bit, and it was sort of passed around a few hands, but then eventually the owner decided to give it back to me to play. So now it's on loan to the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra, and I get to play it.
Excellent. Actually, fun fact I do remember when you were trying two Magginis actually at one point.
Yeah.
You tried both? Because I remember they were both in the workshop at one point, and
I think that was before we had this one. I can't remember, but
because there was that one. I remember that one and another one.
Yeah.
And I remember that time because the anonymous benefactor was in the workshop, and I was actually very pregnant, and I had gone into labour. And I had run into the garden, and I'd run up to see our child, and the anonymous benefactor was there. And he said, "You still haven't had this baby?"
Yeah.
And I just went, "Yep, I'm working on it." And I ran back downstairs.
Gosh.
So I remember that time. And then just a few hours later, had the baby.
Well, there you go. And then we had ours. We got ours. Anyway. Yeah, no, it was a interesting time, wonderful time.
Yeah, it was funny. Like when you play another instrument and then you come back to your Maggini, what's sort of the thing that stands out to you about your instrument?
Yeah, the thing that I think about feel about a lot of these old Italian instruments is it's just got this sheen about the sound. It's not something necessarily that you'd want to hear under your ear close up. It's kind of got this penetrating tone that's not necessarily pleasant under the ear. But what you've got to be relying on is if you give it to somebody else and walk a couple of meters away and then even further out into the hall, you then hear that what's coming out to the audience, and that sometimes is lacking in other instruments, and it's sort of when it's nice under the ear, you go, "Oh, this is great to play," but it doesn't translate to something beautiful in the hall. Whereas this thing, I know that it's sounding absolutely warm and rich and fruity out, the further you go back. Purely as a playing experience, what I love about this one, I mean, it's just really easy to play as well. It's been doing shush.
That's his little puppy making noise in the background.
It's been doing what it's been doing for 400 years now. So it's just like all of the bits, all of the atoms are aligned. I really just don't know. I can't explain it, but it just works incredibly well. It just does what you want it to do without having to work too hard. And also, it's got a very thin neck, which makes it very easy to play. So the last owner was Irvin Schiffer, who was a teacher and player in like the Haydn string quartets and Decani and Tahoe string quartets. So that was 47 years. Anyway, so that was owned by him for 47 years until 2011. Before that, it was Louis Boudet from about 1920 to 1964. He was a Parisian player. So we don't know anything before that, but I just sort of assumed that it was someone with a small hand to make it easier to play. So, but I appreciate that. I don't have small hands, but it just makes it easier to play, which is wonderful.
Yeah, well, that's good. Yeah, no, it's interesting having to, like you were saying, it sounds good in a concert hall setting, and that's another consideration people have to take when choosing an instrument. It's like where they're going to play it and how it sounds.
Yeah, for sure.
And is it a big viola? What are the dimensions?
I can tell you exactly. It's 43.8 centimeters, or 17 and a quarter inches.
Okay.
So obviously that was cut down. Like all these instruments, they weren't sort of a, standard size.
When we talk about a standard-sized viola, what we mean is an instrument with a body length, this does not include the neck, of about 41 centimetres or 16 inches to 16 and a half inches, which makes this one quite a large viola.
But anyway, so this has been cut down. The C-bouts seem to be original. That's about it. And it's got an original scroll.
Oh.
Which is interesting as well, which is sometimes I don't. And it's quite rough, the scroll. Funny. Right. When you hold it up to look at it, both sides don't really match up.
Not symmetrical.
No,
Yeah.
not like this. Not like Stradivarius's scrolls were something to behold, but this one's just a bit rough.
It's tricky with Maggini. Like Maggini, we don't know much about him. His instruments aren't dated. But the 1610, that's like he in his life he was pretty well established. He was actually quite wealthy, and he was living in he had a workshop. He'd left Gasparo da Salo by this point, and he was in his own workshop with his own family making instruments, and it was just him and his assistant.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So there weren't huge amounts of instruments, but that's when he would have made this particular one. 2 years later, in 1617, Maggini now defines himself on a legal document as Master of Violins and owner of Violins, Wood and Strings. Maggini's workshop was on the ground floor and the family would be living upstairs in the living quarters. In this period, Maggini made various instruments like his master, da Salo, but in this era, the violin was gaining popularity and he appears to have made lots of them. He also made sitars, tenors, and violoncellos. Musically, we are moving into the Baroque period and the musical expression was emphasizing feelings and emotions. The violin was a good instrument for this. In this earlier period of Maggini's, we see the backs and scrolls and sides of the instrument mostly cut on the slab. The corners are quite short, and his earlier works resemble quite closely those of da Salo's. In the beginning of the 1620s, Maggini's family is growing. He has been married for 5 years and already has 4 children, 1 boy, Giovanni Pietro, and 3 girls, Giulia Barbara, Domenica, and Cecilia Elana. Maggini decides to move his family and workshop to a bigger premises, and they sell the old house and have now moved into a new house with his 4 children and assistants. Maggini's business was successful, even though his family life would become somewhat tragic. The salaries and wages of his assistants and servants were increased over this time, and his trade stock was larger. In 1626, their new house was in the Contrada della Bombassaria. Sadly, his first son and daughter died in infancy, but his wife had also had 3 more children, Giulia, Veronica, and Carlo Francesco. So there were now 5 children. He also had a property on the hills surrounding Brescia of 10 acres with both a farmhouse and a residential house, and another property on the plains of about 7 acres, and even a third one closer to the estate of the heirs of the Maggini at Botticino. He most likely inherited property and also had the dowry of his wife. All his wealth probably did not come from his instrument making, as he only had 1 assistant. The properties of 7 and 10 acres were most likely came from his wife's dowry, as they border on her father's properties. As his career continues, his craftsmanship improves. Very slight hollowing from the edges and higher archings than his earlier work and later work, neater paraffiling and a more graceful sound holes. The heads are more symmetrical and better cut. The bellies are never on the slab and the backs are very rarely so. These instruments could be comparable to Cremonese makers in craftsmanship but would be less fine. The Dumas tenor is a good example of this second period. Maggini continued making beautiful instruments even as the hints of plague and famine were knocking at the door. In 1628, 2 years before he died, and at the age of 48, they had another son who would die the same year, and then in the same year that Maggini himself died, Giulia, his wife, had twins, Faustino and Caterina. Faustino would die after 2 months, but Caterina would live on. The characteristics of Maggini's making in the years before he died were according to the Hills, Maggini's third period. He had an even greater quality of workmanship. He may have seen and been inspired by the Amati brothers' work or done so on his own. His arching is significantly lower with higher edges. Maggini was one of the first in Brescia to use side linings and corner blocks. His earlier instruments had a browner varnish like da Salo's, but his later instruments have a more brilliant golden, orange, yellow colour. His characteristic double purfling and the sound holes are undercut like viols, not perpendicular like the Amati's and Cremonese school. In 1630, Maggini appears to have died. He was most probably buried in the common pit in the eastern part of town. During outbreaks of the plague, towns and cities acted differently. In Cremona, people were quarantined in their houses, and as we saw with Niccolo Amati, and in Brescia, the sick were taken to plague houses organised by the city. This would explain the lack of information about his death, if he died in one of these places and was buried in a communal grave. In Brescia, during the plague of 1632, the city provided these houses that I spoke of to receive the sick and then throw the dead bodies into the streets. Maggini may have died in a pest house, and this was why there is no record of his death. He would have been about 51 years old. Gio Paolo's wife and children survived him. Anna survived him and died in November 1651 at about the age of 58. Of Maggini's sons, Gio Paolo II became a merchant, Carlo Francesco became a silk merchant, and his youngest son, Marco Antonio, became a priest. None of his children took up the trade of violin making. In this episode, I have gone through the life of Giovanni Paolo Maggini fairly quickly because it is strangely now, after his death, that the biggest story of Maggini's career begins to unfold. And for this, I will be talking to two experts who will explain this fascinating story, Florian Leonhardt and Benjamin Hebert. So join me for the next episode on Maggini, one of the most influential Brescian violin makers, as we unravel the mystery to his posthumous bounding success. I'd like to thank my lovely guest, Chris Moore, for talking to me today. Thank you for listening to this episode. Please do leave a comment and rating. And if you would like to financially support the podcast, that would be amazing. You can go to Patreon/The Violin Chronicles to do that. On social media, I have Instagram with the handle @The Violin Chronicles, and Facebook is The Violin Chronicles Podcast. Thank you for joining me, and I hope you will tune in to the next episode of The Violin Chronicles.